e questo comporta un ritardo tecnologico. Allora, benvenuti a tutti, ai presenti in sala, a chi ci sta seguendo in streaming e ai relatori che dopo il Presidente Giancarlo Bellati presenterà. Quello che mi preme dire è che l'evoluzione tecnologica sta vorticosamente aumentando. Questo ci porta come società a inseguire processi evolutivi tecnologici molto rapidi e molto spesso questo ci vede un po' arretrati rispetto all'evoluzione stessa. D'altro canto però l'evoluzione tecnologica e i mezzi di cui oggi disponiamo ci aiutano in quei processi di evoluzione in tutti i settori grazie all'opportunità di condividere e confrontare le esperienze. Se è possibile, questa ultima pandemia ci ha dimostrato che la condivisione delle esperienze, la conoscenza di diversi soggetti in diversi paesi del mondo può aiutare la società a progredire nei vari settori. E questo è l'aspetto molto importante che io, come Presidente della Borsa Internazionale del Commercio Elettronico, ho rilevato e che come associazione senza finalità di lucro stiamo portando avanti con molti paesi, di cui 2 oggi sono ospiti, proprio perché nel mondo dell'impresa piccola e media vi possano essere delle facilitazioni nei processi di internazionalizzazione. Questo vale ovviamente soprattutto anche nell'ambito dell'ambiente, delle foreste e dell'agricoltura, che sono 3 ambiti strettamente connessi. Abbiamo molti relatori oggi, proprio da altre parti del mondo, anche dall'Europa, per avviare un ragionamento di confronto sulle diverse politiche che vengono adottate nell'ambito delle foreste, ma non solo. E quindi con questa idea, ed è la ragione per cui siamo in streaming, per cui verrà registrata, per cui già alcune ambasciate hanno fatto richiesta degli atti visiti di questo incontro, si possano aprire delle connessioni di dialoghi importanti per il nostro futuro. Io non aggiungo altro, do la parola al Presidente Gianangelo Bellati, che io ringrazio in quanto l'Unione Fiere crede molto non solo nella parte presenziale importantissima per una fiera, ma anche nello sviluppo parallelo di una parte virtuale, ed è quella che ci porta oggi a fare questo convegno. Grazie ai presenti, grazie a chi ci vede in streaming.
Allora, io saluto tutti, saluto i presenti, saluto coloro che sono connessi con noi. Parlo lentamente perché ho capito poco fa che non devo parlare in inglese in quanto c'è una traduzione contemporanea. Mi presento nuovamente, sono presidente della fiera di Longarone Dolomiti. È una fiera di montagna, l'unica d'Italia che ha queste caratteristiche. Si occupa di alcuni settori specifici, fra cui anche quello dell'ambiente dove vive, che è un ambiente di montagna, un ambiente ricco di natura e di foreste. Abbiamo qui un ambiente che voi che siete connessi non potete vedere, ma è molto interessante, quindi io vi dico che l'anno prossimo sarebbe un'occasione d'oro per venire verso le Dolomiti e verso Venezia. È un ambiente molto particolare che è di una importante società della regione del Veneto, una quindi istituzione della regione del Veneto, che si chiama Veneto Agricoltura, che oltre ad essere socia di Longarone Fiere Dolomiti è anche una struttura che si occupa proprio di temi come quelli delle montagne, delle foreste, e appunto agricoltura in senso più lato. È qui rappresentata in sala dal dottor Giustino Mezzalira, che è dirigente all'interno del Veneto Agricoltura e che è anche uno degli, direi forse l'ispiratore di questa appunto fiera festival delle foreste. Oggi noi qui, ieri e domani, parliamo di questo tema fondamentale Abbiamo qui tantissime aziende che lavorano nelle foreste, che lavorano in montagna. Abbiamo però anche istituzioni che rappresentano tutti coloro che hanno qualcosa da dire o che devono fare qualcosa per la salvaguardia del patrimonio forestale e più in generale ambientale. Per coloro che ci ascoltano da lontano ricordo anche che l'Ungarone Fiere, con Veneto Agricoltura, vuole collegare questa grande iniziativa al tema e al programma europeo del Green Deal, ma anche a quello della biodiversità. Sono due grandi obiettivi, il primo 2030, il secondo 2050, che si è dato l'Europa. E quindi questi grandi obiettivi sono per noi anche importanti e vogliamo ragionare con le istituzioni europee e internazionali di questi temi. Per questo, ieri avevamo qui anche un rappresentante del Parlamento e della Commissione europea. Per questo qui abbiamo gli uffici Europe Direct che danno informazioni e assistono i cittadini a sapere tutto ciò che avviene a Bruxelles. Per questo noi abbiamo iniziato con ieri una conferenza europea sul futuro dell'Europa. Quindi un ambiente europeo ma anche internazionale. Ed è internazionale anche e soprattutto grazie alla presenza di qualcuno qui in sala, ma anche di voi che ci state ascoltando e che siete connessi. Ricordo che con noi, lo dico soprattutto ai presenti, ma voi vedete alle mie spalle la slide, abbiamo Sua Eccellenza Giovanna Valverde Stark, ambasciatrice della Costa Rica e della rappresentazione permanente nelle Nazioni Unite in Nairobi, Kenya. Il dottor Marc de Conchat, direttore dell'Istituto di Ricerca Nazionale per l'Agricoltura, il Cibo e l'Ambiente, l'INRAE, e in presenza abbiamo il dottor Roland Delany, direttore del Centro regionale delle foreste della Nuova Aquitania, della Nouvelle Aquitaine, vicino a Bordeaux in Francia. Abbiamo in presenza anche Graziano Trecali, che rappresenta il Dipartimento dell'Agricoltura della regione Istria, che è molto vicina qui a noi, ed infine in collegamento online la dottoressa Mariella Nocenzi, che rappresenta l'Università La Sapienza ed è professoressa in cultura, sociologia e processi politici, quindi Università La Sapienza di Roma. Abbiamo anche in presenza, ma non nella sala, l'ambasciatore del Messico, Sua Eccellenza Miguel Jorge Garcia, ambasciatore del Messico e rappresentante permanente presso le Nazioni Unite a Roma. Fra l'altro il Miguel Garcia, l'ambasciatore, ha partecipato a quasi tutti gli altri convegni. Il tema è molto importante, il tema è quello dell'equilibrio fra la foresta e la produzione agricola, in maniera tale che una non sovrasti l'altra. Io ho già, credo, dato un quadro dell'incontro e adesso direi di sentire i nostri relatori. Comincia con di Miguel Garcia. Perfetto, allora lascio la parola all'ambasciatore Miguel Garcia. Grazie mille.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if you can hear me. you can hear me. I just want to send you a greeting. I'm from outside the room in the main floor of the exhibit. So you hear the noises. That's because the exhibit is taking place and technology doesn't allow me to be with you right in the middle of the room. ¿No se escucha?
No, no se escucha nada.
Sí se escucha.
Can you hear me now?
No.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
yes, yes. I can
Okay,
hear
here we're going to try again.
If you want
Can you
to-
hear me?
Yes, we
Can you
can,
hear me?
Ambassador. Yes, I can.
No. If you want to,
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
no, there is a problem.
Ambassador, I can hear you, but I noticed that the room, the sala hangar
Can you hear me?
has the microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, then I will go over there.
Bueno, can you hear me now again? Somebody can tell me you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you, Ambassador.
Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. I want to thank the organizers and you know, we had to deal with this issue, so no big deal. One of the things I want to do, and Patricio asked us to address, was to try to answer the question if feeding the planet while preserving the environment will be a possible equation for the future. And I just would like to present to you some of my personal ideas on what could happen. Next slide, please. In the next slide, what I am asking is a basic question. Is how will be the world in 2050? I don't think I will see the world in 2050, but I know many of you will see the world in 2050. And in order to provide an answer to the question, we need to ask ourselves how the world will be. And I think the world will have some characteristics. It's going to be a crowded world. Originally, there were expectations 9 billion people, or in English, billions, miliardes in Italian, if I recall right. Current estimates is that we can go as high as 9.7. The fact that we are going to have a crowded world is it makes us to believe that we will need more food. If we maintain current patterns on consumption, the food production needs to increase between 30 and 70% more food. But also, we are going to be facing with the harsh reality of having a world with less resources. We are putting a strong pressure in the planetary boundaries. And everybody agrees that the world in 2050 is going to be much further and much drier than today. And these two characteristics should force us right now to start thinking about what technology, what management, what innovations, and what science need to address for the future. But also in 2050, we will continue to, or we will probably have different social contracts. And I'm sure the last speaker will address these issues when she talks about the social issues around the the issue of food security and access to nutrition. So we are going to have a more complex world. But the good thing is that that world in 2050 needs to be constructed today. Next slide, please. One of the things that I also want to stress is that when we talk about food security, normally when we consider that food security is only an issue of production, but the reality is that food security is much more complex than to see it from the pure perspective of production. Food security is affected primarily by poverty. Poverty is the #1 driver of food insecurity in the world and the malnutrition in the world. And I mention this because unless we address the issue of poverty, the issue of people, we will not solve the issue of food and nutrition security. Secondly, food security is gravely impacted by climate change and climate effects. Today, we are seeing some of the most dramatic impacts. In Europe, we just saw unusual rains in the American hemisphere. Maybe I'm going too fast. In the American hemisphere, we have some fires. My camera needs to be open. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Next. Well, I think there is a miscommunication because the slides are not coming in. So I'm going to continue without slides. And then the other aspect that affects food security has to do with conflict. As you see, many of the people, the food insecure people in the world, are affected by military conflict, exclusion, and migration. So those are the issues that really affect food nutrition. So not all has to be put in the hands of production. Next slide. Well, if you don't see the next slide, I just want to make some comments on what will challenge food production in the future. Well, the first thing that will challenge food production in the future is that we need to develop new production systems, new food systems that are centered on sustainability and productivity. Those are the things that we need to address. Secondly, I think we need to start coming to a realization that we need to diversify our diet, and therefore we need to invest more in the diversification of our production. Third, we need to start looking about producing not only food, but only food that is nutrition and healthy. And fourth, we need urgently to reduce the waste, the waste and losses across the food chain. Also, we are facing challenges regarding our planetary boundaries. We are facing a serious problem with land and water. We now realize that the way that we've been producing food in the last 60, 70 years is having a tremendous impact on biodiversity. In fact, we are facing one of the most serious crises on biodiversity extinction that human history or Earth history has ever seen. So we need to reverse this. We have to deal with carbon and emissions and pollutions. That's going to be a challenge. In fact, yesterday there was a news that in the Netherlands there is going to be a reduction, or there's a proposal to reduce the number of cows just to comply with reductions of emission. And also, we don't have too much water, too much land. We need to look about nitrogen and phosphorus cycles as well as atmosphere. So planetary boundaries are certainly going to affect the way that we produce. And also, there is a change in the social contract. Poverty will continue to be an issue. We need to address the issue. But also, we are dealing with changes in our diet. We are questioning the way we eat, what we eat, when we eat, how much we eat. We need to increase, make the food system more equitable, that is inclusive for the needs of different nations, different rural territories, women, indigenous people. And the most important part today is that it's not about producing number of metric tons, but how nutritious this food is. So all these elements are going to affect food in the future. Next, please. Well, I think we are almost in, you are seeing almost the last one, but previous one, please. Previous one. Well, for some reason you cannot go back. Well, one of the things I wanted to do is that in order to feed the future in the world, we have to do many things. First of all, we have to address the issue of population growth. It is funny because nobody wants to talk about this topic, but I think it's urgently that we as a human look at the population growth, and especially because the population growth is going to be taking place at different rates across the globe, putting more strains in Africa and Asia, and developed countries will have a reduction in population growth. We have to be looking at technology. We also need to start looking about how we communicate these issues. We also have to be looking about international trade, the role of international trade. And also we have to do with issues of health, social contracts, and the need for equity. With this, I just want to say that in my mind, what needs to be done for the future is that we need to invest in public policies to improve investment in agriculture and for agriculture. We need to continue to work on the promotion of human rights, particularly the right of food. And also we need to start working on the changes in governance. So going back to the question that Patricio asked us, do I believe that we can feed the world in 2050? Yes. Do I believe we can do it in the same way that we are doing it today? No. We need to create more inclusive agricultural systems, a more sustainable agricultural systems, and also we need to create a more equitable agricultural systems. With this, I really want to express my thanks. I think I have used my 12 minutes. And again, I apologize for the inconvenience, and but the technology sometimes plays tricks on us, and hopefully one day we will be able to conquer technology. Thank you, and good luck in this event.
Il suo intervento, devo dire un intervento che ci porta ad un giusto ottimismo per il futuro. E adesso lascio la parola a Sua Eccellenza l'ambasciatrice Giovanna Valverde del Costa Rica. Prego, ambasciatrice.
Salve, buon pomeriggio, saluti a tutti e grazie infinite per questo invito. Saluto al dottor Belatti e anche al dottor Baroni. So I would like to...
Stiamo ancora tentando il collegamento.
Mi sentite? Mi sentite? Mi sentite?
La vediamo benissimo intanto. Però,
non mi sentite?
Mi scusi, ha settato...
Non mi sentite?
Capire se ha settato l'audio su inglese e non italiano. Can you set...
You have to check if the audio is on English or on Italian.
Down right of the panel.
Ok, adesso l'ho messo in inglese. Mi sentite? Allora, mi sentite adesso?
Perfetto, perfetto.
Ok, e volevo iniziare ringraziando tantissimo al dottor Belatti e particolarmente al dottor Baroni per questa fantastica opportunità di condividere con voi un po' la storia del Costa Rica. Adesso, now I'm going to switch to English. My name is Giovanna Valverde, and I Let me turn this off. Can you still hear me? Can you still hear me? Okay, I'm going to switch to English. I just want to, let's see if we can get the presentation up. Can you see the presentation?
Sì, però benissimo Greta, perfetto, però dovresti dire per cortesia alla sua eccellenza Giovanna Valverde Stark di settare in basso a destra la lingua da italiano a inglese, perché noi la sentiamo nel canale inglese purtroppo. L'italiano.
I can, yes. Okay, I hope that everyone can hear me now. My name is Giovanna Valverde, and I am the ambassador to Kenya from Costa Rica, and also the permanent representative to United Nations agencies in Kenya, which are United Nations Environmental Program and UN Habitat. I would like to begin by saying this is a very special and important moment historically for Costa Rica as we are celebrating our 200-year independence. So first I want to start off by sharing very quickly some data on Costa Rica so that you can know what we're talking about. Costa Rica is a very small republic, 51,000 square kilometers. It's in the Isthmus of Central America, so between North America and South America, with a population of 5.1 million people. As you can see here, we're in the middle between North America and South America, but what's important is the isthmus in which we are, where we have the Atlantic Ocean on the east and the Pacific on the west, makes us one of the most vulnerable areas in the planet to the impacts of climate change. Now, I wanted to share something with you because this is the beginning, I think, of the virtuous story of Costa Rica. And that is that in 1949, we abolished our army. And I think that was a crucial decision that is occurred 72 years ago, and which changed our development model in the following way. For example, we invested all of the resources that we would have otherwise dedicated to the military. They were dedicated to health and education. We also created institutions which ensured that every single inhabitant in Costa Rica would have, for example, public health, education, electricity. And in fact, some of the statistics of Costa Rica now are that public health care is available for all of its inhabitants. 99.2% have access to electricity. Elementary and high school education are public and mandatory. And 99.5% of our energy comes from renewable sources. This, of course, depends on the year, if there's more water or more rain or less. But basically, our electric matrix is comprised of 72% water, 16% wind, almost 9% geothermal, about 3%, almost 2% of biomass, and about 8% of solar. Nature in Costa Rica, and this is this will bring us closer to the question of what can we have the protection of the environment and food security. For Costa Rica, I think it's not, or perhaps I should say, we are known precisely because of our natural treasures and having become an eco destination. People that come to visit our country, they come to see our nature. And I think that is extraordinary that we have such a small country, 0.03% of the planet's surface, yet we host over 5% of its biodiversity. Now, why is this possible? This is possible because 26% of our country is protected territory with national parks, national refuges, reserves, wetlands, and we also have 26% more of private reserves. So this means overall we have 52% of our territory has forest coverage. Like I mentioned, we have 5% of global biodiversity. In the fauna, we have all of these lists of all the different species and amphibians, reptiles, insects, mammals, birds. And in the flora, we also have an extraordinary collection and variety of orchids and vascular plants, ferns, heliconia. But the story about the reforestation or deforestation began back in the 60s to 80s, where there was a big expansion in terms of public policy to incentivize to have more agricultural and livestock activities. And this unfortunately led to a 70% deforestation rate in our country. And although we had began with the creation of national parks since the late 50s and then the 60s, and we had created our forestry law in 1969, it was amidst this chaotic or drastic situation that the National Fund for Forestry was created in 1997. And FONAFIFO, I think, is one of the most extraordinary projects, and the way it was financed. So now we're talking about 25 years since we created FONAFIFO, el Fondo Nacional de Forestación, de Financiamiento para la Forestación. And what's interesting is we actually created a tax on fossil fuels. And we decided we're going to use this fund to create the payment for environmental services. And what this does is, or has managed to do over 25 years, is pay farmers or people that have land so that they maintain their trees in their properties. So you can see some of the statistics here. Over 22 million transferred directly. That was in 2012. Over $220 million since 1995. Over 700,000 hectares under the payment for environmental services, and over 1,100 contracts in 2012. So the interesting thing about FONAFIFO is it really has made an impact in maintaining the private protection of the forests. And this tax really has helped us to adapt and make us more resilient to the impacts of climate change. And this is how it's going to link to what this question and what we're talking about is important. And although we have been extremely successful in arriving at 52% forest coverage in Costa Rica, it is limited to forestry, 100% forestry activities. So now what we want to do is to be able to move to payment for environmental services 2.0. And what does this mean? This is linked to our commitment to our decarbonization plan as a country, 2018 to 2050. and it includes all of the main sectors: transportation, agriculture, industry, waste management. And the thing is, since our objective is to become a modern, free, emission-free, resilient, and inclusive economy, in order to do this, we have decided and we have committed in the Paris Agreement that in our nationally determined contribution, in order to reduce our CO2 emissions, we would like to increase our forest coverage to 60% by 2030 and reduce emissions in the agricultural sectors through our NAMAs in livestock, coffee, and organic residues. So how can we do this? The only way to do this is we have to take the conservation sector and the productive sector, and we have to work together. And the only territory left to increase forest coverage is precisely in the agricultural farms and in the livestock farms. So we began these NAMAs 10 years ago. In fact, I was the coordinator for the livestock NAMA. NAMA means Nationally Appropriated Mitigation Actions. And we committed 15 years ago that taking all of the livestock sector, we would reduce the methane emissions from livestock by planting more trees, by having live fences, by changing the food that they eat. And with the coffee sector, we also created a NAMA by which we reduce the type of fertilizers, nitrous oxide fertilizers. And with the organic residues, we're doing a lot with sugarcane and other biomass. So what I want to say is our experience has been quite extraordinary in terms of increasing forest coverage, but truly the only way forward, as was mentioned by the ambassador from Mexico, is indeed the agriculture and food sector, food production must work hand in hand with increasing reforestation. And this, as you all know, can be done with agroforestry and silvopastoral initiatives. So I hope this has been of use. And if anybody has any questions, here's my email, and I'd be more than happy to share more information with you. Thank you.
Siamo noi a ringraziare l'ambasciatrice del Costa Rica. Anche questo è un intervento che lascia spazio a riflessioni, quindi anche grazie per poter tenerci in contatto per il futuro, perché è una cosa molto importante. Questa non è una fiera che noi facciamo quest'anno e poi termina, noi la proseguiremo anche nei prossimi anni, quindi noi speriamo di mantenere dei contatti stabili per il futuro. È un messaggio anche questo positivo, sempre che si stia a rispettare appunto le regole, e complimenti anche per tutte le iniziative che sono state presentate nel nostro e attuate nel nostro bellissimo paese. Io volevo dire qualcosa, Patrizio?
Sì, volevo solo ringraziare anch'io l'ambasciatrice, come ringrazio anche l'ambasciatore del Messico che sarà con noi, finalmente dopo lo presenteremo ufficialmente. Ringrazio entrambi perché sono due paesi totalmente diversi e ricchi di punti molto interessanti sia per le attività che fate, ma anche per il territorio, che io invito i presenti ad andare a visitare, perché vale la pena che li ho visitati entrambi. Sono due paesi totalmente differenti, ma assolutamente meravigliosi entrambi. Quindi, signora ambasciatrice, la ringrazio di essere intervenuta e spero rimarremo in contatto per future occasioni come queste. Grazie ancora.
Grazie infinite a voi.
Benissimo, allora adesso secondo la tabella, la scaletta, abbiamo Mark De Conciani della INRAE che può adesso intervenire online. Poi dopo
Hello everybody, you hear me? Is it okay?
Non c'è.
Sì, adesso sì. Prima no. Non sentiamo la traduzione.
Okay, do you hear me? Can you see my screen? It seems that it's not sure. Let me try again. Okay, I see that it's okay. So, thank you for inviting me to talk about my research and the research of my team about the relationships between trees, forests, and agriculture. Is it something wrong? Let me know, please. Okay, I will go on. In classical history, forest and agriculture are often shown as opposites in competition, one having to give way to the other, the retreats of the forest being seen as a sign of the expansion of modernity by agriculture. The current situation seems to rekindle these tensions, which had previously subsided. In the face of climate change, the biodiversity crisis, and the challenges of maintaining sufficient food for a growing population, there are several options for future land uses. They relate in particular to the place to be given to forests in the territories. My presentation aims to bring a different perspective to these debates. Based on recent research, I will explain how certain forests can be assets for a more sustainable agriculture in territories that are better able to adapt to future changes. Far from answering all raised by the current debates on the relative place of forests and agriculture, my talk will just show that there are possible synergies under certain conditions and that it's useful to identify and to develop them. In many landscapes in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, agricultural areas are interspersed with or in close contact with forest areas, or at least contain many tree areas such as hedges, woodlots, and isolated trees. These tree areas are often given little consideration in forestry management and are neglected. However, they have been, are still sometimes, and above all, could become places of very diverse and useful uses for agriculture, but also for other activities. If we try to make a partial list of these uses, we obviously find the harvesting of wood. This can be used for building materials, as building materials for farms or for sale by farmers. Processing is relatively easy to implement now with tools such as mobile sawmills. The most important use, however, is the harvesting of wood for heating and energy production. This is also a fairly simple implement and has the advantage of applying local users. It is a saving for the farmer and an income if his activity leaves him time to shape wood to sell it. Here you have an example of a certified firewood called farmer wood, bois paysan. The production of poles is also important, used in certain regions such as vineyards. Experiments are currently testing ovens to save straw. The first results show a better comfort for the animals. Other experiments are testing the interest of biochar, produced by anaerobic combustion of wood. It can be used as an amendment in horticulture. Colleagues from INRAE in Lusignan are studying the interests of trees and shrubs as fodder and feed supplements for livestock. They have shown that this fodder can be very rich and above all, provide elements that are often absent from grasslands, sometimes with beneficial effects on the health of the animals. The forests themselves, under certain conditions, can be used for livestock to provide shelter and food. For example, there are good examples of pig farming in the forest, which manages to avoid degrading the forest and at the same time produces a sought-after meat at low cost. There is also the possibility of harvesting forest products such as mushrooms, berries, and flowers. This is apparently marginal due to the lack of a clear market, but these uses are probably of relatively high value. Some regions have therefore had to regulate this harvest to avoid tensions and abuses. For farmers, this harvest could in some cases represent an additional income. Besides these old and new uses, agriculture derives many of the benefits from the presence of wood and trees on farm and in their vicinity. Also so-called regulation services, which are more discreet, but just as important. We are gradually beginning to understand them better and above all, to realize their essential roles. They are generally linked to biodiversity. We can mention the service of regulating the flow of water and soil, which contributes to reducing erosions and storing water in the soil. But I would like to talk to you here about the pest regulation services that we have been studying in my laboratory. Some insects, such as carabid beetles, as you see a picture on my slide, are known to be predators of aphids and slugs that cause problems for farmers. What we have shown in Southwest France, and which has been observed in many other regions worldwide, is that these carabid beetles spend parts of their lives in hedgerow and woodlands, in particular to find refuge during the winter. Then they can go into crops to feed on pests, as you can see on this graph that shows the amount of carabid beetles in forests and the nearby crops. The presence of woodland in the agricultural landscapes still helps to maintain a sufficient population of carabid beetles that can help to regulate aphid and slug populations in the field, in addition to other protective measures, of course. Similar results have been obtained with other beneficial insects, such as overflies and wild bees. It has been shown, for example, that hedgerows and woodland edges provide nesting sites for a wide variety of wild bee species that contribute significantly to crop pollination. We are only just beginning to learn how to study these complex relationships. To illustrate this complexity, I can tell you, just for example, that carabids eat aphids and slugs, which is beneficial for the farmer. But they also sometimes eat spiders that are also useful animals for agriculture. As we can see, ecosystem services are about managing the complexity linked to great diversity, whereas the use of pesticides was aimed at managing simplification by elimination. It is therefore a major change of perspectives that requires time to find the condition of sufficient efficiency. This new form of agriculture is called agroecology. It is currently the focus of INRAE's research projects for the coming years. In this agroecological approach to agricultural landscapes, wooded areas, woods, and trees have important roles to play. This is what is being developed around agroforestry in particular. This set of agronomic techniques aims to introduce trees into the agricultural system to improve its efficiency. A lot of work is currently being done in France on these agroforestry techniques. They show that trees bring benefits in many situations. Rural landscapes with trees and woodland are thus preserving increasingly clear advantages for agriculture when we know how to adapt to take advantage of them. However, there is still a lot of research to be done on management of these woods and trees. Indeed, at the moment, they are often not or only slightly managed with very few interventions. Our research work in the human and social sciences have shown us that farmers in the southwestern France are attached to their woodlands, but carry out very little intervention. We believe that it is possible to invent silvicultural techniques adapted to this small forest and to the means of the farmers in order to valorize and to improve all the benefits that can be drawn from them without damaging their ecological values. This particular type of silviculture has yet to be invented, far from the classic recipes of silviculture that only aim at producing wood. Finally, I would like to emphasize that these wooded areas in rural landscapes play over important but underestimated roles. In particular, they contribute to the character and typicality of the landscapes. This is a strong asset for tourism activities in which farmers are sometimes involved. It is also known that these landscapes and their trees have a positive influence on the well-being and mental and physical health of inhabitants and their visitors. Thank you for your attention. I will be very glad to answer your question, and you have my email if you want to contact me. Thank you very much.
A disposizione. Abbiamo 3 ulteriori interventi, saranno abbastanza brevi e comincerei con Roland Delany.
So, if you can hear me, I will change my screen.
Forse non ho ascoltato il canale inglese.
C'è Alessandro. Sì, adesso sì.
They can hear, but I can't change my screen. So I have this screen here, and how do you change the screen, please? If I want to change my screen. where is it?
Ah, okay. I don't know. I don't know.
What is here?
Yeah, I
But
think.
yes,
This is?
yes, but
This one?
can't change it. No,
No,
this
one?
one. Yes, but
No, just a moment. Where is Zoom?
zoom is here. Here.
I don't know. That's a problem. Which computer I think. Maybe.
No,
No.
no, it's not. No, no. No, no, this one. I'm sorry, but it's impossible to change my screen.
Okay, don't worry. I just go to call Franz and
Yeah.
he will.
Torniamo allora, facciamo un altro intervento.
Allora parla adesso sull'esperienza istriana e croata, parla il rappresentante della regione Istria, Graziano Trecati.
Prima di tutto voglio ringraziare il Presidente per questo invito. Io sono vice assessore dell'assessorato cultura, pesca, silvicoltura e economia della regione Istria. La regione Istria è una piccola regione in Croazia che importante che punta tanto sul sviluppo del turismo e da noi il turismo è prima economia già 30 anni. Dopo il turismo, soprattutto vogliamo sviluppare anche l'agricoltura che è basata sui nostri prodotti. Questi prodotti sono vino, olio, carne del bovino istriano, capra istriana, pecora istriana e su base di queste razze vogliamo sviluppare anche i nostri prodotti. Però abbiamo anche diverse tipi di piante come piante dell'olivo, da dove sviluppiamo la produzione dell'olio di oliva che è molto riconosciuto non solo in Istria e in queste nostre zone, anche nel tutto il mondo è sicuramente riconosciuto come un olio di alto con questo che abbiamo vogliamo salvaguardare il nostre zone con anche sviluppare delle produzioni che sono
You must set after now there is another.
Abbiamo visto che anni 60 quando si è sviluppato il turismo la gente da quel paese è andato a lavorare sulla costa e questi paesi sono rimasti vuoti. Dall'anno 90 lavoriamo e abbiamo visto che non si può salvaguardare il territorio se non sono presenti i produttori, però i produttori devono essere economicamente, devono guadagnare di più in questo lavoro che alle altre zone. E con questa idea abbiamo anche sviluppato l'intro della nostra regione e adesso vediamo che i giovani agricoltori vengono a lavorare proprio in queste zone. E quindi sì, con la loro presenza abbiamo visto che è possibile salvaguardare le razze e anche tutto il territorio quando si lavora con le regole che abbiamo messo già 20 anni fa e vogliamo che la regione Istria diventa regione. Perfetto.
Graziano, molto gentile, anche grazie di aver parlato in italiano così chiaro. Adesso vediamo se riusciamo.
Se siamo pronti, io però mi permettete, faccio sempre la promozione turistica, conosco molto bene anche l'Istria, invito chi non la conoscesse ad andare a visitarla, lo dico anche per chi ci ascolta in teleconferenza, perché vale assolutamente la pena, non solo per il mare, anche per i prodotti tipici, e poi soprattutto in Istria, prendo un po' di tempo in attesa che ci dicano che tutto va bene. C'è una grossa facilità per quelli come me che non parlano inglese, parlano solo spagnolo, italiano, che in Istria parlano tutti italiano, vero o no? Praticamente si arriva lì dall'Italia è come essere a casa, è un prolungamento sostanzialmente. Va bene, siamo a buon punto, se no facciamo parlare, ci siamo? Se Roland può intervenire. Io vedo Franz con Roland che stanno cercando di risolvere i problemi tecnici, perché se no chiederei, per non farla aspettare oltre, di parlare alla professoressa Nocenzi e invertiamo l'ordine della scaletta, così Roland ha tempo di finire di no? Allora, se mi mettete per favore in linea la professoressa Nocenzi, questa è la presentazione di Roland, eccola qui, forse ci siamo ora. Sì, direi di sì, ora dobbiamo solo vedere se lo sentiamo. Vi chiediamo scusa, ma siamo, come dicevo all'inizio, nell'epoca tecnologica, però evidentemente non tutto funziona come dovrebbe. Però gli interventi erano importanti e molto interessanti, anche in un confronto di realtà così diverse e politiche e strategie complementari, se applicate in un mondo condiviso. Mi potete mettere al posto del mio ritorno la immagine di Roland? Così vediamo. Se mi sentono le traduttrici, è tutto a posto? Sì, tutto bloccato. Devo fatto partire, no, ma anche questo sito bloccato. Quindi di iniziare. Va bene, allora possiamo dire a Rolando se mi sente, le traduttrici mi aiuteranno che può iniziare con la sua presentazione. Grazie. Ho fatto partire, c'è l'ambasciatore, ho detto no. Ma lui ha la cuffia? Come ascolta? No, ha le casse audio, non lo vuole. Vuoi iniziare? Siete basso? Che vuole sentire?
So, sorry, I hope you can hear me. Well, so I am Roland Delary. And first, I would like to thank the president and all the organization. And so I tried to use this screen. And you said feeding the planet and preserving the environment. Our first food, I think, is oxygen. That is to say, when a baby is born, first he cries because he needs a lung. Then he sucks. So the importance of photosynthesis. And secondly, you said, in search of a balance between the need to expand agricultural spaces and that of maintaining an adequate green lung for the planet. But I say, a stomach without lung is a bottomless pit, no? Isn't it? So, I will try to give you a sort of speech around the 3S project, which is forest sequestration with photosynthesis, and storage of carbon in wood products, and then substitution. So we built in France a sort of label, which is the label bas carbone. We consider that we have to have a carbon offsetting approach from the enterprise. The enterprise has to measure the gas emission, then it has to reduce this emission. And if there is non-reducible emissions, so we can have a carbon project. A carbon project must be an offset approach. So we build this label. And for example, I have this slide. You know, it's a sort of story. My forest is destroyed, 30 years of forestry fell to the ground. The wood is no longer worth anything. I have to reforest, but the investment is heavy. How can I do? And in front of him, my activity pollutes. I would like to make a gesture for the climate. First, I have reduced my emissions. Then I would like to offset voluntarily part of my carbon emission. This is the label bas carbone in France. 15 years of work for our organization CNPF from 2006 to today. And the label bas carbone is a tool. It's a tool to award carbon mitigation. That is to say, we have objectives. First of one, to promote forest sustainable management, of course, to trigger management changes, practices that improve carbon sequestration and wood product use, to pay these practices changes and innovate with private funds for forestry, and to implement the national low carbon strategy. So who is concerned? All project leaders, forest managers, farmers, etc. And you know that gathering is advised through representatives. Everybody can develop a method. Each company, local community, aiming to support local and certified projects. No? So what is a project label bas carbone? It's a project which reduces the emissions of sequestered carbon. In this slide, you have a baseline scenario and a scenario with project. And you know that the baseline scenario is without the introduction of new practices. And the scenario with project with an introduction of new practices. But a project which respects some quality criteria will have the label bas carbone. That is to say, additionality, monitoring of the emissions of and sequestration, verification by an independent auditor, traceability in a register, management of the risk of non-permanence, which is very important, and taking the other impacts like biodiversity, water, soil, socioeconomy into account. So, for example, in France, we have 3 methodologies redacted by our organization, not 4 or 5, only 3. The first one is a methodology of afforestation. Afforestation with on agricultural land or abandoned lands. It's a process of natural colonization. The second one is a methodology of reforestation of destroyed or impacted forests, destroyed by storms, forest fire, diebacks, etc. And the third one is a conversion of copies to high stands. It's very important because we try every year to have another methodology, but with the ministry, we have to work to have other one. The characteristics of the methodologies, we need that we need a duration of 30 years for each one. It's a ex-ante carbon credit, of course, and we have a credit generation after 5 years for afforestation and reforestation, and same day for conversion. We have an audit with documentary, a file audit, of course, because we have to know if the density is good and the living plant, is good. And for reforestation, the same thing. And each time we have some of carbon discount, because perhaps there is a lack of economical analysis, or there is a fire risk, a dieback risk in a region. So the ministry said, oh, 10% less or 20% less. Perhaps we can't demonstrate the fertility class, etc. It's very, very practical. In France, in this time, since the beginning of the year, we think we have 800,000 euro of carbon projects and more than 30,000 tons of carbon calculated. For example, the name of enterprises in this year, like Big, Team, etc. So the carbon strategy, an example, just to end my presentation, near Bordeaux, which department is Gironde, we have 9 million tons per year of carbon emissions. For the agglomeration, it's 3.8 million. And only for Bordeaux Métropole, it's 3 million tons per year. So if we want to reduce this emission by 6, we have to compensate with a lot of forest. And we calculated that with a lot of calculation, and we need to stock 637,000 tons of carbon more per year before 2050. That is to say 3,400 per year. Well, we think it's a lot. So we used to say to the municipality, we are beginning with 600 hectares per year. And now, if you want, before to end, I have a film. If somebody can give me the film, and I said to the end, of course, I said thank you, and I want to say also, il futuro è negli tue mani. So if you have the film.
Niente, non riusciamo di pure che non riusciamo a andare a
Fatto partire, però purtroppo non riusciamo, e io passerei la parola alla professoressa Nocenzi della Sapienza.
Okay, I understand.
Good morning to you all, and thank you to Dr. Bellati and Dr. Baroni. I hope that you can hear me, and like that can you see my presentation that I try to share with you to optimize our time. My speech is to conclude, to try to define some conclusive remarks, thanks to these very interesting speeches, the speeches that in previous time we have heard from some different experience and places in the world. And as a sociologist, because my expertise is that of social and sociological analysis of this phenomenon, my teaching and my research activities, as you can see in this slide, I try to define some conclusive remarks thanks to a discipline, sociology, that can help us to define in a framework analysis if we can talk about an equation to reply to the focus of this event between feeding the planet or preserving the environment, or to define some different strategies. And my proposal is to analyze the analysis of the phenomenon that we are talking about, that I can try to define as an example of sustainable development, to explain some key factors, some pillars that can help us to reply to the question of this event, but also to explore some different strategies, alternatives to the interpretation of this phenomenon and of the case studies that the ambassadors, my colleagues, have presented in the previous speech. How sociology, or which kind of interpretation sociology and social sciences can propose for this goal, the explanation of sustainable development and the equation among different objectives and different challenges. Because as you can see, sociology could be interesting as a framework discipline because analyzes social phenomena, and so the interaction of different factors, aspects, the analysis of the human agency and of how people live some transformation, as the transformation that we have analyzed thanks to the case studies before, and define the behavior of the humankind, of women, of men, so we can try to define how this behavior can change in a transformative world to improve this development in sustainable terms. And we can apply this model of interpretation to the agricultural processes and research that we have learned before, but also to very interesting case studies as Mexico and Costa Rica are. Sociology described in the last decades a transformation that can be useful to the definition of key factors and keywords of the sustainable development that change the superiority of the human agency on the other living species to a specificity that could enrich the planet transformation, the planet equilibrium. And today we apply a new paradigm that could be defined a new ecological paradigm, because thanks to this idea that humans are only one of the planet species and only one of the actors that can interact with the other resources, environmental resources or economic goals or political interest, can define different relation with nature, as you can see in the first column of this slide, different social causation, a specific context for human society, and they can detach some constraints on human society, as you can see in this new ecological paradigm. The definition that we can outline thanks to this transformation of the paradigm, to the analysis of the human action on the planet, can define what could be defined as sustainable development, the use of resources, social behavior, and so on. We have to remember that the definition of sustainable for a process derives from a forming concept. The sustainable harvest is when you can distinguish between resources that can grow indefinitely, but also when these resources are limited, are exhaustible. So this distinction try to define a very interesting key elements for our interpretation. That is the development, but also limit. When we reflect about the exploitation that has not to exceed some safety threshold, we also can add some other key factors as equity and responsibility. Ambassador Winder talked about equity, and the equation among resources was defined thanks to the Costa Rica example by Ambassador Valverde. So if we try to describe some key factors, so we define 4 very important factors: development limit, equity, and responsibility in the use of resources and in the human agency in planet. Then we have to retain that time, space, and relation in this new form of development that could be defined as sustainable are changed. And these changes are so radical that we have to remember that they can affect our choices, for example, between feeding the planet and preserve environment. For development and responsibility, we can explore, for example, 2 hypotheses: that our planet could be a physical reality that has a balance, that has not to challenge to guarantee the equilibrium, but also a second hypothesis that is a very important scholar, as James Lovelock defined as the Gaia hypothesis. And so the equilibrium has to preserve, because our planet is a regulating organism, and we have only to have a behavior that is responsible in the definition of this equilibrium. We have defined also this distinction. Yes, okay. Yes, I have only 1 minute to conclude. We have only to distinguish the risk and danger in this case, because the human agency is very important not to challenge this equilibrium. So we can say that we can reply to our questioning through 3 strategies. And the question is possible only if the goal that we have to obtain is challenged in a positive way. So taking into account all the key factors that we have seen before, the 4 key factors. We have also the possibility that goal and challenge not to be in balance, as for the case of industrialization and urbanization. But in my opinion, and thanks to the literature and our research, we can define your cases and your question as a trade-off model, because we can obtain some goal, but the challenge is not perfectly posed for this goal. So we have, and I'm concluding, to work to define a correct strategy for a correct challenge to obtain this goal. As for the Agenda 2030 goals, we can see following the different trade-off synergies or equilibrium among all the goals. If we have some other type of question, I'm available through my email to answer and to confirm with you. Thank you for your attention.
A disposizione poco. Io ringrazio tantissimo tutti i relatori. Scusate, ripeto, per alcuni problemi tecnici e speriamo di risentirci quanto prima anche per approfondimenti. Grazie a tutti.
Io ringrazio anche, scusatemi, l'ambasciatore nuovamente del Messico presso le Nazioni Unite, Miguel Jorge Garcia Winger, grazie di essere qui con noi, è venuto da Roma e fra un incontro con G20 e l'altro ha avuto la possibilità di venire qui con noi. E vi chiedo scusa a voi che state entrando e all'organizzatore del successivo incontro per il ritardo che abbiamo avuto e con la Costituzione. Grazie a Rolanda per essere stato con noi.
Grazie a voi.